so we're underway. We're filming. So.
Right, we're filming. Okay. To begin, we begin at the beginning. I think I was born in Lismore while my parents were living at Wollongbar. I don't remember anything about that, of course. And then we moved to Springgrove on a country house.
Yep.
Dad was working at the sewerage works at the casino, so that
Was he? I didn't know that. Yeah.
That was quite convenient for him because it was fairly close.
Yeah.
We then moved to Caniva, just out past where Parandenia is at the moment.
Yeah.
And I have a few memories of that. Probably the first one was cutting my foot on a broken green bottle. And my sister Jessie was there. And I still have a bit of a scar on the side of my heel.
Is that right? Yeah.
Also, Mum had to go away somewhere. Whether it was for a day to have Roy or something like that, I don't know. Because she just ducked into town, had a baby and came home in each case.
I see.
And I was sent across the road to a bloke called Jim Colliger.
Yeah.
Jim worked for the council and he had a wheelbarrow, a rake and a shovel. And he was filling holes on this side road that went off the Lismore Caniva Road. And I can still remember him. I followed him all day with a hat to keep the sun off, of course. The only traffic on those roads was the occasional sulky.
Yes.
There was no motor vehicles at that stage. There may have been some, but
Yes.
we didn't see them.
No.
We then moved to Wadeville. A few things I remember out there. I can remember the white cockatoos in the corn. I can remember people pinching our watermelons. We went to a Latin slide show up at the Wadeville Hall, and my first moving picture. And I can remember Roy Rogers in his big white hat, but that's all I can remember about the picture.
Okay, so that's in the mid-30s.
In the mid-30s, yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So it was a pretty tough time at that stage, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Dad was share farming there.
Yeah.
And I don't know how the Williams family found out about Dad being a share farmer.
Yes.
But from Wadeville to Swan Bay, where we were then moved,
Yes.
was a long way.
Yeah.
And somebody must have said that Dad was a pretty good operator.
Yeah.
To get somebody to go down and share farm on a dairy with over 100 head of milking cows.
Yeah.
I can remember when we first moved down there, this big house, which is not really as big now, it's shrunk with age, I think. But the Williams were moving to Corokai. It was Herb and his wife and children Henry and Margaret.
Were they farming on that farm?
They were farming.
Okay,
They
so
were
they
dairy
moved
farming.
from there. Okay.
Yeah, they were moving it. He was retiring from the actual activity of farming, although the old man took a lot of interest in the farm while we were there, which was wonderful.
Yes.
But they were moving into a house at Corokai that wasn't quite ready.
Yeah.
So we blanketed off a piece of the veranda, and that's where their furniture was. They were,
Okay.
and we couldn't go out onto that side of the veranda, big veranda that went basically round the house. They were only there for a very short period, I think. And it was there from then that I first started school. I was 5 and a half, I suppose, at school was at Swan Bay.
Yes.
We had to walk all of 500 metres to go to school. And lunch was always at home with Mum and the family.
Yes, so Jim Ormond was the teacher there, wasn't he?
Jim was the teacher, you know.
Yes.
I spent a lot of time during my life with his son Jim.
Yes.
And now his grandson Steve is the secretary of the Corokai Vets Golf Club.
Okay.
So the family, the connection runs very deep and very long there.
Yeah. So how many kids went to the school? Do you remember particularly?
I think Lola, your mum, had
Yeah.
just finished school. I don't think she went there because That would have been late 1936, and she was born what year?
1924.
24. So yeah, she'd been 12. She'd been big enough to milk cows.
Yes.
So I can't remember her there, but I can remember Maisie being there at school.
Yep.
On one particular occasion, Jim Ormond we were talking about tea, where it comes from and how it's made, and that you know, he wanted us to get the biggest piece of tea leaf we could when you finished your pot of tea at home.
Yes.
And I can still remember Maisie saying, "Can we get them before they go into the pot?" and Jim said, "If you got time to unroll them, you might be able to." But I can still remember lots of funny little things that happen on your way through. You do
Yes.
remember.
Yeah, well, that was a one-room school, wasn't it?
One-room school.
Yes.
There was the veranda, undercover area attached to the school. Then was the school house.
Yep.
And
he lived there, or did he live somewhere else?
he lived there.
So there was a house attached to the
House
school?
attached to the school.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, and big outside toilets, of course. And,
Yes,
horse paddock where some of the first kids used to come on by horse.
yes,
Jim Ormond used to go each morning, row the boat from down near our front gate across to the river, Coracai Woodburn Road,
yes.
and pick up the York boys and a few other kids, Pearsons, that they would come to school, and then he'd take them back in the afternoon.
So they got rowed to school by their teacher and back home again?
Back home again, yes. And we can still see them behind you.
Yes.
You think you can see them, but I'm pretty sure we do see them in our mind.
Yeah, and I presume that all the kids were in together from sort of first year up till sixth class?
Up to sixth class, yes.
Yes.
And Jim Ormond's wife was the needlework teacher, of course. And,
Yes.
the girls used to do needlework, and I think we used to help him in the garden.
Yeah.
He was a great gardener as far as sweet peas. He always collected the manure from the horse paddock, put it in a big drum and
Yes.
fill it with water, and then just before he planted his sweet pea seeds, he'd dig a trench and pour this fertiliser
Yes.
along, and they were the best sweet peas I've ever seen. They were, not 8-9 foot tall and very long.
Yes.
Very long stems and 4 or 5 flowers on the one stem.
Yeah. Did you get to take some of those home, or?
No, they were Jim's, I think.
They were Jim's, were they? Yes.
We could have, I don't know. Our family had a great relationship with Mr. and Mrs. Ormond. And,
Yes.
they probably would have sent some home.
Yes, yes. So what sort of things happened when you were at school, out in the playground and things like that? Because we were just the one group of kids, we played games that could suit the little ones to the big ones, and yes.
one game I think was countries, where you had the ball, tennis ball, and you threw it in the air and you called out a letter of the alphabet.
Yes.
And whoever had the most points on that letter got the next throw. And he'd run and pick up the ball and throw it. It was good. But we used to play rounders and
Yes.
Red Rover crossover and
Yes.
these. And yes, we had our Empire picnic each year, and one of the activities we had at the Empire picnic was boiling a billy.
Yes.
We had a set size billy. I think it probably that you got your tin fruit in, but it was a biggish billy.
Yes.
And you had to dig a hole, set a fire, and set it up, and then boil the billy.
Yes.
And all the boys were very disappointed because one of the Lee girls beat us quite easily. She was smart enough, or her dad was smart enough to get lantana pieces, of lantana, which burned very quickly and very hot.
So the competition was who could boil the billy first. Who
boil it to the boiling point first.
Oh, I see. and Joy Lee was the winner, and the Lee family lived quite close to us too, and we spent a lot of time with them. And,
Yes.
yeah.
Where did they live?
They lived about 100 metres from the school.
Okay, so
on
they
the,
were
on the river bank.
on the riverbank.
On the river bank, just away from the school.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay, that house is not there anymore, is
Not
it?
there anymore either. No, the school and the schoolhouse and everything is gone.
Yeah.
We were back down at Swan Bay a few weeks back with spreading my brother Neil's ashes,
Yes.
and it was sad to stop by the school spot and
Yes.
see nothing.
Yes.
So there was one or two trees there that we remembered, but that was it.
Yes. No, well, it's quite a unique house, that one, isn't it? It's quite an interesting design and everything like that. I presume the Williamses built that on that.
On that land, yes.
It must have been during the First World War or just after the First World War. I don't know.
I would say before.
Yeah.
Before the First World War.
Yeah.
The farm was originally divided into 3 properties.
Okay.
There were 3 properties, and there were some indications as to where the previous houses were.
Okay.
And when we arrived there was an old house just behind the fig tree from where
Yes.
where our house was. There was an old house there,
Okay.
and it was used sometimes to sleep people in.
Okay.
It was pretty
Pretty.
broken down, but
Yes, well, they used to, the land grants were given in 40-acre lots, so there were probably multiples of those.
yeah, so the property was 235 acres. So
Okay.
it was,
Yeah,
and the best place in the world to grow up.
yeah,
With
yeah.
that, we had 50 metres of boundary fence. All the rest of the boundary was fresh tidal water,
That's right.
full of fish and wild ducks and
Yeah.
whatever, and some great swimming spots.
Okay, so you finished, the school closed in 1941,
By 1941.
so you would have been 10 years old at that
Yep.
stage?
Yes.
And what happened with school at that stage?
We then went by bus. We had to go across the river then. So instead of Jim Orman picking them up, we had to take ourselves across to the road
Yeah,
and caught the bus at that stage. Kirkland's had just started their bus runs.
okay.
I can remember the first morning we got in the bus, Mum standing outside the driver's window talking to the driver, what responsibility we had to behave ourselves, or they had to make us behave, and some of the other kids who didn't know what was going on.
Yes.
Come on, lady, leave him alone, let's go, we've got to go to school. I can still remember that.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 So that was, you crossed the narrow point.
The narrow point of the bay.
What did you call that narrow point?
That was the neck.
A neck.
The neck of the
Okay.
bay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if the boat was on the other side of the river.
Oh, somebody had to swim across and get it.
Yes. Yeah, so you went off to school at Coracai. So who, that would have been,
Jesse,
yep,
Barry and myself to start with.
yes,
Gordon was going to riding a bike to Woodburn School at that stage
okay,
because he'd gone into high school while while Swan Bay was still open.
I see,
So he
yes.
did a few years. Probably his intermediate certificate at Woodburn,
Yes,
so just saying that, I remember the name Mr. Foster.
yeah,
He was Gordon's agricultural teacher, and he came up to the farm one day, and with the yard they made a cup of tea at the front of the yard, and he wanted milk in his tea, and there was a bucket there with milk in it, and he was about to use that, and he said, "No, don't use that. That's fresh milk." And he said, "Well, fresh milk's all right." And I said, "It was colostrum, the first first milking from a cow with a calf." And so
yes,
it wasn't.
yeah. So you went off, the three of you went off to school at Coracai? Yeah, so that was a different experience to the one teacher school?
Yes, it was our first teacher at Coracai was called James Jazz Allison. He had retired from teaching and had come back because of the boys that had gone away during the war.
Yes.
And he taught there for a while. And that's where we met his wife, who was one of the sweetest lady you'd ever meet. She used to come and teach us singing.
Okay.
And Jessie and I were involved with the singing, and as was a few of the others, Cecil Hill, Keith Wins, and those that I can remember.
Yes.
But she taught us some songs that you never hear now, of course, or very seldom. And she taught us to sing The Marriage Farewell, Drink to Me Only, Silent Night, in parts.
Okay.
And we'd never thought of that.
Yes.
But for the next 95 years, I think we've sung those at various places.
Yes.
And Jessie and I would always sing in parts with particularly with Silent Night and Drink to Me.
Well, Shirley, Jessie was known for her singing.
She was.
She often got the to sing at all sorts of different events.
Yes.
Yes.
She had a beautiful voice.
Yes.
I didn't realise how good it was until a couple of years ago. Barry's late wife, Nellie, had a copy of a tape
Yes.
of Jessie singing, and it was played, and you couldn't pick it from a top class professional singer.
Yes.
The tone and the notes she was good.
Yeah. And she was school captain at Coraki also.
She was school captain at Coraki, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you said school captain, was there sort of the year class 1 to 6, and then the high school after that, or how did all that work?
No, it was we were like Swan Bay, only a lot bigger.
Yes.
Everybody mixed in together.
Yes.
And the school captain was chosen by year 9, which was and the teachers. They chose
So which was third year in high school,
now
as it was
last year,
called then. Yes.
for our leaving
Yes.
certificate.
Yes.
And
Well, it would have been intermediate.
intermediate certificate, sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Intermediate certificate.
Yeah.
And I still remember all the kids who were in that class, and kept in touch with most of them over the period.
Yes. Yes.
And,
It wasn't the only school in town, was it? There was the Catholic
the
school.
Catholic school was across the road, and we used to play football matches against them, and
Yes.
there was a couple of little groups that used to have amateur boxing tournaments behind the shed. They were terrible, including a couple of my brothers.
Oh, that's not true, is it?
Wouldn't be Barry and Roy, would it? Who missed the first bus because they were having a fight with somebody from across the road. And it's amazing how things have changed. They were clollywhackers, stink like crackers, these.
Yes.
We used to throw taunts at them, and they would throw taunts back at us.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
once the school bell rang, you're all mates anyway. It
Yes.
doesn't make any difference.
No, it was interesting because the families, even they didn't intermarry at that stage. There was
No,
a difference between
no,
the
no.
Protestants and the Catholics.
Yes, and I must admit that caused me to, when I was first engaged,
Yes.
long before I met Lynn, that problem came up, and that what broke up my first engagement.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Mm,
I wonder, we might catch up with that one later. We're going to talk about that. Yeah. So when you were at Coraki School, you were a member of the junior farmers also. What was all that about?
Yes, well, that was being a country farm and a country school, and it was a wonderful organisation that gave you a chance to learn more about farming and the running of farms and the choice of animals to have on a farm, so that you got the right animal that suited the right function.
Yeah.
And the school teachers were very in favour of it, but it was something outside the school, and Ian Robinson, who later became the Honourable, I'll look in the mirror,
Nicknamed the Mirror.
Nicknamed the Mirror, he was our secretary. It's strange that when I first left school, my first job was with Ian's dad, anyways. But the junior farmers, we held, the local group held little field days. We had one at our place at one stage. And the big ones used to be at the research centre at Wollongbar.
Okay.
And you'd have, 500 people there with that, which was good.
And at these field days, there were competitions run. What sort of competitions were they?
Yeah, well, the girls had needlework, judging needlework and cooking and such like that, but for the boys it was judging of vegetables. They would supply us with a set of vegetables, of cattle, pigs, poultry. They were the only three animals I think that we judged, and the one at Swan Bay was held on our farm. They called it our farm. It was never our farm, but it is.
Sure.
It's still
Yes.
still called our farm, and it was quite a big day. There was probably 50 or so junior farmers there.
Yes.
I won the judging of the pigs.
Yes.
And got second in the dairy, and second in the chooks or something.
Well, that was a pretty good effort. So when you were judging, tell us about what was that about? What did you have to do?
Well, you had to look at particularly with the cows, you looked at the shape of their body, the shape of their udder, and the positioning of their teats and everything like that, and their milk line, which runs from the udder up under the stomach,
Yes.
and you can feel where it goes into the body.
Yes.
And that had to be nice and firm and pronounced, and all these things.
All these things, good characteristics.
Good characteristics, and whether they were docile or touchy and
Yes.
quite good. One of the ones we had at Wollongbar we had the guest of honour was from South Africa. He was an agricultural person, an ambassador or something from South Africa, and during his opening of the actual field day, which the opening came at the end, of course, as it normally does, and he said that there was he heard that there was an outstanding judgment in the poultry section, and later on the day I got this prize for judging the poultry. There were 3 different hens, all the same breed, exactly the same breed, and I can't remember what it was, but I picked something that would preclude that particular hen, best looking hen in the lot, but would preclude her from being a true example of that breed.
Okay.
And I picked that, and
So therefore, you got the extra
I
prize.
got the extra prize. Yeah,
Well done.
it was quite surprising too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you had the field day at the farm at Swan Bay, they were using all your chooks and pigs
and cows.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
So what sort of things were grown on the farm? They obviously had animals. What were they?
The cattle were AIS, red dairy cattle, and the Williams family they owned the cattle.
Yes.
Dad owned half the milk.
Yes.
Or cream, as we used to send.
Sure.
We used to send cream. But the Williams family always provided top class bulls.
Yes.
There was a family here at Alstonville called the Grey family. They had an AIS stud, and we had a grey bull for a long time. Then they bought a young bull from Badalla down the south coast. It had won first prize in the junior section at the Sydney Royal Show.
Okay.
And I still remember him coming to the farm, big gangly looking bull, but he produced some beautiful cattle. We,
Yes.
with the calves that were born, the heifers we kept so that
Yes.
to replace cattle as
Yeah.
we went along. Half the bull calves also we also kept, and they were raised up to be steers
Yes.
or beef cattle. They were sold for beef cattle
Okay.
later on.
Okay.
Uh,
So you had cattle, and milking was obviously the main
the main
occupation.
occupation, yes.
And you had pigs because you
Pigs.
fed the
The skim milk.
skim milk to the
The
pigs.
The milk was always separated. The cream was separated from the milk through a separating machine. That went into 10-gallon cans, and then it was picked up at our gate 1, 2 or 3 times, 4 times, sometimes 4 times a week,
Yes.
depending on the season, as to how much cream was around. But
Yes.
usually 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday and Friday. And the remainder of milk, which is skim milk, would be pumped across to the pigsty, where that was fed to the pigs.
Yeah.
And
And you grew corn.
we grew a lot of corn.
Yeah.
The corn season was during the summer, of course, but when the corn had ripened up, and everybody would be on deck, would go out and we'd go through the paddock, and we'd pull the cobs off the stalks and throw them into a heap. There'd be, say, 3 rows either side, and we'd have heaps down every 30 or 40 metres down the centre. Then we'd bring the captain in the dray, the horse captain, he was the dray horse. We'd throw all the corn into the dray, take it back to the barn, tip it, and then we used to spend night times over there with lanterns, and there'd be probably 8 or so of us husking corn, taking the
Yes.
husk off the cobs,
Yes.
and they were thrown up onto a straddle, and then we would then shell the corn, and that would go into a big bin about
You had a corn sheller.
corn sheller.
Yes.
You just turn the
Wind
handle,
the handle,
wind the
yeah.
handle, and somebody would be putting the corn in, and
Yeah.
it ran straight into this big bin, which was a timber bin about 10 foot long by 4 foot square.
Yes.
It was lined with galvanised irons to keep out any vermin, either
Yeah. Rats.
rats,
of course.
mice, or
Yeah.
weevils. And
Yes.
that was then fed to the pigs and to the chooks, and we always had plenty of chooks, chooks and ducks that helped feed us as well.
Yes. Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of money
No.
in dairy when you got 11 kids anyway.
No, that's right. So you had vegetable gardens and things too.
Yes, and the vegetable gardens at the yard was near the dairy was good, because there's always cow manure,
Yes.
and that would be put heaped, and then when it broke down a bit, you were growing vegetables in almost pure cow manure.
Yeah.
And I still remember the peas and cabbages
Yes.
and rhubarb that used to grow in these gardens. And
You used to have a garden right outside the house, but there was one further over too, wasn't there? A bigger garden
at the yard,
at the yard, was it?
right beside the dairy.
Yeah.
The dairy was an 8-bale dairy. It was probably 25 metres long,
Yes.
fully covered,
Yes.
and then the garden was beside that.
Okay.
But that covered dairy was great because of the wet weather. If you're milking cows by hand, if it's raining, you've
Yes.
got the water dripping off the cow all over you, and it's not very pleasant.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was the main task, was really milking, wasn't it? So.
Yes.
Who got to do the milking, and how was all that organised? Who did you?
Well, Mum got out of bed first every morning. She made Dad a cup of tea.
Yes.
He couldn't make himself a cup of tea, but wasn't very expert in the kitchen.
But he'd make a cup of tea, then one of the boys would go and get the cows in, and it'd be very dark in the morning.
Yeah.
It was, particularly in the winter, that wasn't a very pleasant job getting the cows in because it was frost on the ground. And
Yeah. So how many cows would you milk?
we got up to 117. It was the
Okay.
highest, I think, when we were milking by hand.
Yes.
And there was Dad, and then there was any number of 4 or 5 of the children plus Mum. Mum always, in the early days, always milked.
Yes.
You know, that went on for a few years, and I think when anybody turned 9, they got their own bucket.
Okay.
Yes, you had to be, once you turned 9, you had to be in the Wales to help milk. Those that were under 9 used to come in and learn the trade when they wanted to, but they weren't obliged to come in. But after that, it was part of our job.
Yes.
And you learnt that when there's work to be done, you did it.
That's right. So even though when you were going to school, you'd go and milk before you went to school?
And then you'd race over and Mum would have breakfast ready for us, and wash our feet, and then go and cross the neck of the bay and into the bus. And even at Swan Bay, when we go to Swan Bay School, well, I was too young to be milking then anyway.
Sure.
But, on the farm we also grew fodder for the cattle. We had what they call cow cane. It was a brand of sugar cane that's very thin stalk.
Was that saccharine?
Similar to saccharine. We also had saccharine at times,
Okay.
but we mainly it was cow cane because it was a perennial crop. You cut it down one year, and like the normal cane, it'll grow up again.
Yes. Yes.
And you go and have to cut a slide full of that and take it out and put it in rows out in the paddock.
We're underway again. So you milked by hand for a long time, and then you had milking machines.
Yeah, the machines probably went in about 1943. I'm not quite sure of the date, but it went in and it made it so much easier. Mum didn't have to go to the bales every morning and night.
Yes, that's right.
And 3 people could handle quite easily. In most cases, just 2 people.
Yes.
And the cows took to them quite well. It just made life so much easier.
Yes, that's right.
For the whole family, actually.
Yeah.
At that stage too, of course, the girls were starting to leave home. I don't know, what year did your mum get married?
1946.
46, so it was just after that.
Yes. And I think Maisie got married in the same year or nearby, so I think at that stage.
And Bonnie had gone,
Yes.
and the boys, Ashley and Barney, were in the army.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there'd be Roy and Neil and Barry.
Barry, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
They were coming on, following on. And
Yeah,
Neil was only 5 in 1943,
yes,
or 4, actually,
yeah,
1939.
yeah.
Yeah, so that made life a lot better, and I don't know whether things changed on the farm. There was probably a little bit more work done on the farm then,
Yes.
a little bit of probably pasture improvements.
Yes.
That was never thought of very much in the early days.
Yes.
And even by just overplanting some of the pastures with red clover and stuff like that, that made a beautiful winter feed for the cattle. Previously, the cows had only lived on a bit of corn, a bit of cane that we gave them.
Yes.
Plus paspalum.
Plus Parliament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They looked it's a great herd, a big, strong herd of cattle.
Did you ever have paspalum seed? Did you ever?
Yes, there was people called Southwell from Old Bar down near Taree came up and families became very close after a while, but they used to come up each year. And at that stage the school had closed, and they used to, I think they had a caravan or something that they slept in, but they used to deposit all the seed. They went around all the farms in the area looking for paspalum to collect.
Did you ever go out in the stripper?
I didn't, but Gordon did. He used to sit in the stripper.
Can you tell us how did that work?
Well, they had a box with long teeth on the front of it. The teeth were made out of just the galvanised iron being rolled to a point, and as it went through the grass, the heads got caught in there and just came back into the box behind.
Along with all the spiders and
spiders and anything else that happened to be there. And,
so if you worked in the stripper, what did you have?
You finished up very dirty at the end of the day, and probably spider bites and stuff in your eyes and ears and nose.
Yeah.
It wasn't a very, very pleasant job, but
Yes.
it was. They made good money out of these people because they were selling the seed to New Zealand. New
Yes.
Zealand, paspalum doesn't seed in New Zealand.
Okay.
It's amazing, and but they made good money, and they were very generous to Mum and Dad too, I think, because they virtually stayed with us.
Okay.
And there was, probably 20 or 30 farmers that enjoyed getting an extra.
Yeah, I know we had it on our farm at Oakland Road. I remember taking a ride in the stripper once.
Oh, did you?
Once was enough, of course.
Could never be found afterwards for that particular job.
That's right. Yeah. So you had the family was a big family living in the house. Where did everyone sleep around the place?
I was thinking about that earlier this morning. We had double beds, of course. Never in a single bed wasn't much use because you only get two in it.
Yes.
The double bed, I can quite still remember three of us at the top and at least one with his head down the other end.
Is that right?
And the legs all mixed in together. But four boys would be sleeping in the one bed,
Yes.
and two of the girls would be sleeping together.
Well, your mum and dad slept in the room which overlooked the river, didn't it?
Yes.
It's a nice room, that one, wasn't it?
Beautiful room, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lovely spot.
Yeah.
The whole setup was just so good, but and with the house in a big, quite a good kitchen, but a very big breakfast room.
Yes.
And meal time was we had a long stool along one side of the table. It was a big table too. It wasn't just an 8 or 10. It was
No.
probably more than that. You'd probably get 14 or so at the table,
Yes.
which we needed, of course, with 12.
Yeah.
And meals were always fairly orderly. A lot more orderly than I see meals being carried on in families these days.
Yes. You didn't get to choose much, did you?
No, you had what was on the table, and one thing was that the ducks and the chooks and the odd wild duck that fell over
Yes.
made life pretty. We ate pretty well.
Yes.
Mum was very innovative with the way she cooked. We were never short of. We had the baker come 3 times a week, but we were never short of bread because Mum would make scones or
Yes.
damper, or there was always plenty there. We always had plenty of jam and butter.
Yes.
And honey and treacle.
Did you have any dripping? Did you?
Not very much. It was one of the we seemed to get away from that. But if we were short of butter,
Well, you could make some.
we can make some. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah.
Dad wouldn't eat it.
Wouldn't eat butter.
Wouldn't eat that homemade butter.
Is that right?
Now I don't know whether it was because we were taking money off the Williams family by using half the cream we used was theirs, of course,
Yes.
or what it was. But he just didn't like that homemade butter.
And you had, along with chooks and ducks and, did you kill any pigs or cattle on the farm? Did that happen?
never killed any cattle.
No.
No, they belonged to the Williams
Yes.
family.
Yes, okay, so you had to sell them and that's the way the money was.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm sure that if Dad had asked them, they would
Yes.
have minded,
No,
because
understood.
they, you know,
Yeah.
we ran about 20 odd steers every year.
Yes,
We killed the odd pig,
Yeah.
not often. It's,
yeah,
I think the money that you could get for it
yes,
was probably more value than
yeah.
the meat we got.
Well, there were other jobs to be done on the pigs too, weren't there?
Oh yes, they weren't very pleasant, but Dad was very good with a sharp knife or a razor blade. And,
Yes,
it was a loud period of
yes,
the day when the poor little pigs went before they went to market.
yes.
But,
Did you participate in that activity?
oh yes.
What was your job?
The towing the pig,
Holding the pig.
back legs, his body between your knees, and you just hung on.
Yeah, where did you do that? Did you do it in the trough or did you tip them upside down?
It's upside down between your legs.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yes, if they were too big, I think they probably would have gone into the trough
yeah,
on their back,
yeah,
but usually it was just.
yeah, when they were small.
Yeah.
And along with that you had plenty of fish to eat.
Yes, fish. There was always fish available because it didn't matter what, even though the moon was bright, you could still go out and the fish would jump in the boat at night time.
Yes,
If you went to the right places,
yes,
you could always get fish to jump, and that was a big thing. But quite often, well, so probably once a month, sometimes twice a month, depending on how the fish were running. You used to get exempted from milking in the afternoon,
yep.
and Dad would send you down to catch fish for tea tonight. We've got nothing for tea tonight, so go and catch some fish. And it was just, you just did it.
That's what you did.
And the fish were there.
So
You knew
what sort of fish did you catch?
Mainly the flathead. Some seasons there'd be bream, but you know, beautiful big flathead,
Yes,
and perch in season.
yeah,
Although there was no off-cut of seasons in those days. These days, when it's spawning time, you
yeah.
can't fish for
So
perch.
so how did you? What did you use to fish for perch? Did you use a wobbler or did you use a hook or how did it work?
Well, three ways actually. It was just a hand line in various spots within the river, and you knew exactly normally where they might be. The early morning shift on the rowing boat,
Yes,
you had a 30 foot of or 60 foot of line with a wobbler on the back, out over the back of the boat, and you just rode round the front of the boat, the river at the front of the house, and every now and then you'd get one bang. We used to catch caught a lot of fish like that
yes,
in season.
yes.
And then in the neck of the bay was one particular spot, and they're still there too because a mate of mine had been catching them recently.
Is that right?
When the tides start to go out, you've got a kelly rod
Yep.
with a floater,
Yep.
and about a 3/4 of a metre length of line under the cork.
Yep.
And you put a grub or whatever on it, and just let it float out with the tide. Next minute, it would just go down gradually, and you'd have a perch on the end of it.
Yeah, nice fish, the perch.
So yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Dad caught one that was just over 6 pounds.
Is
and
that
it
right?
was
That's a big
beautiful,
fish.
beautiful fish. It was lovely, yeah.
And flathead, of course, they did a different technique for catching flathead.
Yes, at the mouth of the bay, there was a couple of spots there where you tie to the bank and throw out into the outgoing tide using shrimp or
Yeah,
for bait, and they were there waiting to get stuff coming out of the bay. You know, it could be any sort of, because they'll eat, and fish eat almost anything.
yeah,
And you'd invariably catch flathead unless the season, unless the water was too fresh or.
Yeah. Well, there was also flathead used to be on the point across the other side.
Across the other side, yeah.
Yeah.
And Dad had friends that used to come down from Lismore. They'd borrow our boat and they'd go out into the river just above where Lee's used to live, just above the old school. There's a nice big sandbar there, and they just let the boat drift and drag their lines, and they used to get a lot of flathead there on that particular sand drift.
A lot of people wouldn't believe it, but you said a minute ago that you went jumping mullet. Tell us how that happened. What was that all about?
The technique was that a rowing boat was a normal rowing boat, and this was one that Don McPherson built for us, which was good.
Yep.
A real solid flat bottom boat, or very, very little tilt in the bottom. You'd have a tilly lantern. Somebody would sit on the back seat and hang the thing just over the back of the boat, so that the light was shining at an angle either side. And you'd row along close to the bank, and the mullet would be in the reeds and that at night time. They'd see the light and they'd come out and jump and finish up on your.
If you were lucky, they'd jump in the boat.
Jump in the boat, and 6 times out of 10 they did.
Yes.
But then in the bay itself, that was in the river. In the bay itself, there were schools of woolly-nosed mullet, and they could be any size from 6 inches to, a couple of pound. You could go into a school of them, and it was like hail, the fish jumping.
Yes.
They just jumped in the air, and certainly they jumped towards the light, of course.
Yes.
And you could always catch mullet.
Yes.
In the 2 boats went out one night, rowing, one behind the other, probably 20 metres apart. And they got over 300 mullet, jumped into the boats, and they had to they were throwing them out as fast as they could jump in.
Yes, it's an interesting. I've told the story to people, and they just
don't believe it.
Don't believe it. Yeah, that's right.
Now the ferry, we used to do a little ferry at Swan Bay, and it was a hand, because you wound the ferry across on the guide rope. Quite often they'd get their fish, the fish would jump out and go up onto the
flap of the
flap of the ferry, yeah. And the same thing happened at Corokai Ferry.
Yeah, I've seen that happen.
Yes,
Yeah, so you had lots of people visit on down there and come and.
Yes, it was such a. So the spot itself, the house, and then that 30 metres of flat ground, then the bank down into the river, and the wide expanse of the river. The river bent right in front of the house.
Yeah.
So you've got, 300 yards in a line of water, wide.
Yeah.
And being a fairly big family, mums, brothers and sisters, I'd say a minimum once a month, probably more, probably 2 or 3 times a month, one of mum's family would come down with their family.
Yeah.
There were 10 in mum's family, and
yes, that's the Saul family.
The Saul family,
yep.
And most of them were living round the area, and they'd come down and spend the Sunday with us, and it was always, they'd bring their own food, and we'd all put food in together. And
yeah, so this was the period when you were a teenager and growing up before you left home. So all that was happening even at that stage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dad's family wasn't so constant, but there was still quite some, some that did come and stay. Not stay, but for Sunday lunch. And we used to have aquaplaning on the river there.
Yes.
And
Donald McPherson.
Donald McPherson with his boat, talking of Donald, pardon me, one of my jobs, or not only mine, or Barry's as well, was when Donald was milking by himself on the farm across the river, just up the river from us a bit. Donald was an oldish man, never married, but his parents were still alive. But we used to go across and help him milk at weekends
Yes.
to give him a bit of a break. And and he repaid us by coming down and taking us for rides on his back with his backward plane behind. And
Yes.
he built little sailing boats, and he used to let us sail the boats for him.
Yes.
I'm just going to get a drink of water.
Okay.